What's up, you guys? Welcome back to another episode of DU Rambles. We're recording live. It's Tuesday morning. How we feeling, Ray?
I'm feeling really good. I'm glad that we settled on DU Rambles because it's a nice title. I like it because there's no pressure in it whatsoever. In fact, there's almost like a little bit of license to be a little bit more, I guess, irreverent because we're rambling. So I mean, there's no cohesion here. I can go in any direction I want. It's always a lot of fun, for sure. But I got to say, fucking excited, Jackie. A lot of cool shit's happening. You know, it's funny because in my life, I've always been, well, I say always. Fuck, that's the benefit of getting old. You start looking at the last like 2 decades as always. In recent memory, I've gotten into the habit of not looking forward too much, because there's a big part of like the manifestation community and whatnot, or just even just the self-help motivation community where they're like, you got to focus on that vision, you got to have that view of where you want to go and what it's going to mean to you, and have that big juicy carrot, and that shit always led me to, well, disappointment, frustration, and making it about me. Like, why am I not getting to the carrot? Am I not good enough for the carrot? That kind of thing. And so after a while, I've just realized, like, it's just that I want to feel better about my life. And so I'm looking to a place where I envision it's going to do that. It's going to feel better. And as that's changed, I've realized looking too far ahead is very much like looking down the path and not looking at your feet. And I got tired of stumbling. And so what I started doing was recognizing I can't be thinking about directions to go in where the doors aren't there now. Like, there are infinite doors that we have right now, and they lead in various different directions. And if I look at those directions, they go somewhere. There's a bunch of possibilities. Like if I put time and attention into this, that could happen. If I put time and attention into this, that could happen, or that could happen, or that could happen, blah, blah, blah. And so I'm always looking at the doors that are in front of me. What can I do with what I have? Right. And so when something's not possible, like the podcast, for example, at one point, it just wasn't possible. As much as I might have wanted it, it just wasn't possible. I didn't have the skills, the connections. I didn't have the courage, I guess, to put myself out. Like there was just a bunch of stuff that weren't possible. So what I did was I focused on the doors that were possible. I got better at web design. I got better at sales. I got better at pushing myself in other directions. I worked on my personal relationships. I worked on my insecurities, and different doors started to open. And where I'm going with all of this is eventually the doors led to a podcast, and eventually the doors of the podcast led to a retreat, then many retreats, and now they're leading to somewhere else. But what excites me is that the doors that I'm seeing in front of us lead to fucking more dope shit with Jackie being involved with all of us, because we don't live that far apart. And now with Andrew and Amanda out here on the West Coast, with the reformation of our company, or rather the restructuring of our company on this side of the continent and everything else, this makes it way easier to collaborate and do shit and go in different directions. And it's just neat because I can see a lot of fucking doors. And so I'm stoked to see where this is all going to go. And admittedly, I've been thinking to myself, I might tune in to some of the yoga with Jackie and Andrew episodes and maybe give a little bit of yoga a try. I've got to be careful about it because, again, I'm not supposed to do there's considerations with glaucoma and yoga and all that. But I've been getting the yoga bug lately. I don't know why.
Very interesting. Yeah, I know there's like things with not being able to like have your head lower than your heart or whatever it is. Always modifications to be made. Yoga is really you can use the tools however you want to, and there's no like required poses that you have to be doing. So yeah, I'd love if you could tune in and just take what works, leave the rest. That's all we're ever offering. But excited about all the shit coming up, honestly. And it's been cool to see how this has all evolved just by doing the next thing that really made sense. And it's funny how all of our stories, our timelines have kind of interwoven in a way that has felt really natural. And yesterday we were talking a lot about the timing of everything. It's just it's uncanny almost. And it's cool just to witness when you're not forcing an outcome, the way things just kind of work themselves out. And it's like the path of least resistance, sort of. And yet that's far and beyond what I ever imagined I could be doing at 23 years of age. So it's super exciting stuff, and it's just going to keep growing. So I'm as much though as it's exciting, it is a little overwhelming. I'll be
I'm
honest.
terrified. I'm absolutely terrified. Absolutely, because again, like, we're not doing anything that anybody's ever really done. Like, this is a very different thing in many different ways. So it's not just my own insecurities and whatnot. It's also the fact that there's no map to follow. There's no template. There's no one to look to and go, how would you do this? Because they would likely do that in a way that was controlling and profit centric and trying to establish that sense of security, which is, unfortunately, as tempting as it is, it's not embodying what we're talking about. And there will be some consequence to the programming, or there will be some consequence to the content, just by the fact that we're going to give it.
Mm-hmm. I think there's a tendency to, we just doubt that things are going to work out if we're not following this laid out path. And yet, even if we do follow that laid out path, there's always uncertainty and there's consequences. And that's what we see with the system working as it is. There's a lot of fucking consequences from businesses, prioritizing profit over everything else and just trying to grow to an extent that's almost like pathological. And we're just doing things really fucking differently. It's an experiment. So yeah, it feels like going 100 miles per hour without a seatbelt. And yet at the same time, it's felt really natural. And it's just been, us contributing what we can in our own time. And yet it's picked up speed in the same way that flowing with the river is sometimes faster and more, actually all the time, faster and more efficient than trying to like force your way to swim against the current because that's the way you think you should be going, or like digging a little side river because for some reason that's what you have been told is safe or makes sense. And yeah, it's hard to like explain what we're doing to anybody who's in the system and prioritizes like, safety and security in their job. Again, it's not true safety and security, but like talking to my parents, I'm like, they do not understand this at all. Like, honestly, really nobody in my life does. Like, they might be supportive and they're like, yeah, like I see how important this is to you, and like all like good for you, but at the same time they're like, I really don't get it. And I have to be able to not take their opinions seriously or like allow it to take over what I already know, the benefit of this is, because it's changed my life in the way that I, think about myself. And there's so many possibilities, so many more possibilities that are on the table, and so much more freedom and just acceptance of my life and myself as I already am. And that has opened a lot of doors for me. Um, and I understand why people would be like concerned for me, I guess, or like, they want me to be safe because they're, doing the same things, and they have an idea about what the best thing for me would be, but nobody fucking knows. And it's funny how much we'll trade just for the feeling of security, even when it's not actually there.
and spend our whole life thinking about the things that we could have done had we just had the courage to do so. Like we'll take the secure path and then we'll look up to people who do incredible things, not realizing the only reason that they did those things was because they had the courage to step away from the secure path and all of the people that told them not to leave it. Right? I told you the story of the reluctant Messiah. It's a
Refresh
fish
my
story.
memory.
It's a fish story. It's a good one. So imagine there's this river and it's slightly upstream from the ocean, and there's this breed of fish, and the fish only survives by clinging to a rock and catching food as it goes by in the river. So its whole life is just clinging to the side of a rock and just catching food as it goes. And it has other fish that are clinging to the other rocks, and this is its life and its people, let's just say. It's not a great life. You're kind of getting what you can. It's not always easy, right? And sometimes things get very hard and scarce, and other people get more than you, and it doesn't seem very fair. But it's always just enough to survive, and you're always dealing with this pressure. And one day, one of the fish says, "Well, what if I just let go?" And everyone's, "Fuck! Don't do that! Don't do that! You're gonna get carried away. You're gonna get hit by rocks and shit, and anything could happen. You don't know what's down that river." He's like, "That's a good point." He doesn't do it. Keeps living like that for a while, and finally just gets tired of it. Like, if this is life, this isn't what I want. So he just lets go of the rock and starts drifting down the river. And sure enough, he starts running into branches and shit that are going down the river. He bumps into a few rocks, and then he figures out, oh shit, there's like a flow, there's a current to this. If I just relax and feel the current, I can feel where it's drifting around the rocks. I can actually kind of influence my way down the river. And so he starts to get that. Finally, as he gets down farther in the river, he hits the ocean. And there's nothing but space and freedom. And there's food on the ocean floor, and he can swim around. It's nothing like anything he's ever experienced. It's just him in this directionless world. Absolute freedom. And he stays there for a little while, enjoying himself. And then he remembers where he came from. He remembers all the people still clinging to rocks. And so he swims around, he finds the original river, he climbs back up the river, swims his way back to his rock, and grabs back on. And everybody's like, oh my God, where the fuck have you been? Like, we thought you were dead. What happened? And so he tells them the whole story about how he tumbled down the river and learned that there was a flow and found his way to freedom, and that there's this other experience that he had never dreamed of. And they're all just listening to him. And they're like, well, what do you do? He says, just let go.
Yeah, that's a great one. Very symbolic, that feels like what we're doing in a way. Like, not that we're messiahs or that we have it, we're like have any sort of special intel. Like, really, this could be a path that anybody could go down, or just letting go of the rock and plunging into uncertainty. And just like how the fish figured out how to like avoid the rocks, after getting bumped around a few times, like that's sort of what we learn to do when we just like have the sensitivity to feel things out and trust that whatever we decide to do at any given point is valuable, and it'll teach us something new that we can then use moving forward. And it's actually crazy how quickly our skills can develop when we just throw ourselves in. It's the best way to learn, really. And in order to do that, you have to be okay with throwing yourself in, feeling completely unprepared and terrified.
Yeah, I would say it's really the only way to truly learn, right? Like, there's a difference between memorization and recognition, right? And Andrew was saying this the other day. Like, anything that you recognize, you don't really have to memorize. Like, you've just taken it in. You're like, that's how that works, right? So you're no longer going, well, this is that. Why that works because of this. It's just a recognition that you've had. You're like, no, that's obviously why that works. Right? This is the difference between conceptual knowledge and actual knowledge. Like, you can tell yourself all day long that you're not your idea of yourself, while having an idea of yourself for doing so. right? And that's the funny part, right? Is that it's not until you continue to hammer against that wall where you find yourself so lost in the idea of yourself that there's nowhere to go. There's nothing but more conflict. There's nothing but more need. There's nothing but more needing to go somewhere or more trajectory. And finally, you just go, fuck, it's all about me, right? Which hits you different than somebody else's words saying all your thoughts are about the illusion of you, right? But to actually have that moment of, oh my God, I just keep thinking about myself, and actually to take it in is different. Like that's the shit that changes you, as opposed to trying to memorize the words in order to feel a certain way about yourself.
Yeah, that definitely resonates for sure, because there have been countless times, since having this conversation that I like have said something a million times, and then one day it like hits for real, and I'm like, okay, now I feel what this insight is, rather than just knowing it, I guess, and saying all the right words. But it's similar to like how in like looking towards the future, we have all of these plans and paths that are imaginary. They're they're not based in reality, really. They're all tied up in that idea of ourselves and where we think is the best way to go, and what path would guarantee the most security and stability and safety, really. But what we're left with in actuality is the moment right now, and the doors, like we were mentioning earlier, that are right in front of you. And and when you keep just walking through doors, you're creating a path, but it's never the path that you thought you would be on, because
And you don't get to
it's
know.
you don't get to know where it's going, and that's terrifying. It's like the path that's in front of you is like blocked by this mist or something. So you don't even know if the next step you take you're going to fall off a cliff. And it's fully possible that anything could be behind that, but you just
You
have to
also
let
don't know you
go.
can't fly.
Very true. Touche.
Right. Absolutely. That's exactly it. Like all of our fears about what's in that mist of the unknown comes down to our assumptions about our ability to adapt to it. Right. Like the unknown's not scary if you don't think it's scary. It's just what it is. Right. But the idea of what it is almost always anchored in the idea of what you are. Right? It's
Mm-hmm.
not the unknown you're afraid of, it's your inability to deal with it.
Exactly. Yep. It always skews towards the negative, I feel. Not saying that it's always going to be that way, but I think we're just taught to err on the side of caution and fear. And I think to some extent it's evolutionary,
Mm.
right? Like it's that drive to avoid danger and death, so that our species can fucking continue. But I think that fear has, you know, expanded beyond where it makes sense. And a lot of the things that we're doing where we're plunging into uncertainty, as in like creating a business that is, embracing uncertainty, that's not actually life threatening. Like if this were all to collapse and not work out, we'd still be fine. And I don't know why we just make things into this whole terrifying like monster in our heads when it's really nothing. Like we act like we're gonna get eaten by a lion or some shit if this doesn't work out. And yeah, that fight or flight um, response is just applied to way too many situations that don't actually matter all that much. It's only when it's only threatening the idea of ourselves, which we already know is not us. But at the same time, that's like our life raft, I guess, on this sea of uncertainty sometimes.
Yeah. And just like that, the world changes. See, it's funny because we get so caught up in looking for big changes in the world and in our lives and everything else that we don't recognize all of the changes that we've ever experienced, or all the changes that we've ever had an influence over throughout human history, has always come down to what we do now. It's always come down to what we do now. And that means that it's always coming down to one of two responses to uncertainty, right? Fear, or just accepting it, looking at it in the face and moving through. And so when you look at the conversations that we hear on podcasts and television and the news, and even in a lot of schooling and academia and whatnot, it's all very much in the realm of false certainty and conceptual control. It's all in the realm of what does this mean about me? Where does this get me? How do I get more of a sense of value? How do I compare myself? All of that conversation's going in that direction, and it has for a very long time. And so even a moment where you have a different conversation with yourself, where you have just a moment of self-honesty and go, yeah, I'm just trying to feel in control. I know why. It's because I'm afraid. That is an admission that hasn't been made by a lot of people for fucking thousands of years. Because we don't want to admit it. And our culture's like, no, we have control. You're not afraid. We have control. And so just that moment, just even continuing on this podcast for another moment changes the world. It's changing the world each and every time. And we don't look at it that way, but it is, because it's changing us, and we are the world.
We are the world. However that song goes, I don't know, but no, that's
We
so
can say it like that.
true. Yeah, and we don't think about it like that, because I think still our default is to view ourselves as separate, and so we don't see how just us pushing ourselves out of our comfort zone just a little bit more, and allowing ourselves to take another step into that scary mist. It's like it becomes less scary over time, but us being out here doing it, even if one person sees it and is like, oh shit, that's possible. I mean, that's how I felt when I first listened to this podcast, and it doesn't necessarily need to come from this podcast. It can come from other areas in your life where you see somebody do something that's against going against the grain, and oftentimes we admire those people, right? Because they're doing deep down what I guess all of us kind of wish we could, in a sense. Like, we all want to grow and push our boundaries, and yet at the same time we have this fear that can hold us back, and the more that we listen to it, we become more and more just repressed, and like that uncertainty and fear is still under the surface, and the only way you can conquer it to any degree is facing it head on.
Yeah.
And that's with everything in life. Like, you're not going to see change until you're willing to confront that uncertainty. That's that next step that you want to take. Yeah.
And I wanted to address a comment as such, because somebody was saying here, I tell friends all the time that making changes in life is such as work or relationship has never killed anyone, but I'm autistic, and change is a very hard struggle for me. I don't know a single person that change is not a struggle for. I just want to say that, and I say this as somebody who has a conversation quite frequently with many different people where they just assume nothing ever gets to me. And it's just because it doesn't look like it's getting to me, because I just kind of take it and go through it. Right. And they're just like, oh, well, yeah, life is easy for you now. Like, no, it's pretty much a struggle, like every fucking second of every fucking day. Like, and still, because that temptation to hold on to what you know, that temptation to resist the change, that temptation to want to overanalyze things for the sake of slowing down that fucking change, all of that, it's always there. That scratch, or that itch, is always tempting to scratch, and it makes change difficult. And it's just by virtue of, again, habit. We learned to white knuckle our way through life. We really did. Like, we learned to have an idea of yourself, have an idea of the world, have an idea of your friends, have an idea of your community, and fit somewhere within that. We've been very much conditioned to think like that. So to expect ourselves to just go, yeah, fuck all that, and feel okay is unreasonable. It's just completely unreasonable. And that's not to say that you can't eventually get to a point where you're like, yeah, that's all arbitrary, and still be okay. It's not that it's not a struggle anymore. It's just that you've been through it for so long that it's becoming familiar. It's like any other process of intelligence, right? Like, if you jump into a new job, first little while, you feel like you don't know anything. 6 months later, you know enough to tell the new guy, right? And within a few years, it's like home. And you just know it. That's just the process of familiarity. And the same is true with uncertainty, except with uncertainty, you can't become familiar with uncertainty. What you can do is learn to be yourself.
Yep. That's all we're out here trying to do in any second, and you can't really help but be yourself anyway. So you might as well just embrace it. But yeah, change is not ever fucking easy. It's uncomfortable, and that's where the whole growing pains thing comes from. It's never once been easy, and yet it keeps happening whether you like it or not. Like, no matter how much we try and slow down our growth, because it's intense. It's almost like, you're going down a water slide or a river and you're like clawing against the sides and you're making it honestly harder on yourself because you're resisting, the how things are naturally going. And I definitely relate to that feeling of just assuming that everybody else isn't going through the same thing. And it's just because we don't have access to other people's conscious experience, but that doesn't mean they're not having it. And it doesn't mean it's, not as fucking intense as ours is. And, you know, every time without fail, like when you talk to somebody who's done something that you're like, wow, that person just, you know, they're so amazing at this thing. They were probably never afraid. They probably, just had all this skill. They say no, like it was a struggle every step of the fucking way, but I think we just want to put those people on a pedestal to kind of validate our victim complex where it's like, "Oh no, but I couldn't do that, because whatever reason you want to give yourself." Um and yet the more that you cling on to that false belief, the victim complex, you're just stagnating. Yep, feeling like a victim is a super easy way to feel special for sure. It's like, yeah, I'm going through a special type of
My,
struggle.
my pain is special, says the ego all the time.
Mhm.
Absolutely. You know, so this is a fun one, and I find this to be something super common. And I think when we're honest about it, everybody knows this, everybody's done this, but because we're not honest about it, people who are going through it feel like they're the only ones going through it. And so, specifically, I'm talking about that weird layer that seems to expand or get thinner according to how much you're thinking about yourself in a conversation. And so you can be in a conversation with a group of people and they all appear to just be bouncing back and forth, having a conversation. And you are thinking about how well they're doing that and you're not. And so when all of a sudden they talk to you, there's that gap. There's that moment's hesitation, and you don't know what to say because you weren't really fucking paying attention. You weren't really listening. You were thinking about yourself. And so now you got to struggle to go, oh shit, and translate and then come up with something to say. And then once you've said it, now you go back into the filter about thinking about yourself, which takes you even farther out of the conversation again. And so now next time it comes around, because that filter that is created through the idea of you literally slows down your processing of everything that's happening in real time. And so you just assume, well, everybody else is doing better because there's something wrong with me, which is part of the filter. It's part of the reasons that you're having so many difficulties feeling like part of the conversation. Because to be part of the conversation is to let go of what it means about you. It really is. It's just to be yourself. And there's so much risk in that, but we try to mitigate that risk through thinking about it. And through thinking about it, we end up not in the conversation, which means we actually end up in a greater quote unquote risk, right? We end up actually making it more likely that we're not going to be able to have that conversation because we're trying to control our way through it. It's such an interesting filter, but it happens. It's lightning quick. We can be talking to one another, and then all of a sudden I'm just going, is she talking about me? Am I doing okay? Am I saying the right thing? And then you're just waiting for me to respond while I'm going through all that stuff. And then I panic. I'm like, oh my God. And I say something, and because I rushed and I hurried because I was panicking, now after the fact, I'm like, fuck, I probably said something stupid. And it just becomes this fucking downward spiral. And yet people end up in this place, and then what they do because they feel uncertain is they quote unquote mask, which is really reaching for the grab bag of automated responses. That's all it is I've said something before that landed fairly positively, so I'm just going to reach for that and say it again. Right? Doesn't that sound like the brain in action? It's like, oh, this worked in a similar situation, I'll just reach back and do that one more time. And then we're like, well, that didn't land the same way. It's like, right, because the first time it was part of a conversation that was actually fluid and organic. The second time it was rote. You weren't in it. You were saying it for that security, which is not the same. It's an interesting thing that happens in real time. You can watch it happening all the time. Just listen to who you're talking to and then think about yourself. And all of a sudden you can't hear them as well.
It's happened to me multiple times in this conversation. So I feel that. And, it's not something to judge myself for at the same time, because that's just making it thicker.
Exactly.
But it is nice to be able to just own up to it though, and be like, wow, I'm really fucking thinking about myself a lot. And that in and of itself kind of breaks it down, and you can connect with that person on that level. And that's what we're doing a lot of the times here on DU, where like we don't always have something to say. We never really know what we're going to say. And there are some days where it feels really easy. And there's some days where it feels really fucking hard. And it's like everything I'm saying, I'm judging myself. I'm, stumbling over my words. I'm forgetting what I say in the middle of my sentence. And yet you just keep going. And the more that you do, the more fluid it can kind of become. It's like when there's like a pipe that hasn't really been flowing for however long, and there's like, buildup of dirt or whatever in it. And the more that you just express, that's like that water pushing through, pushing all that muck out. That's that filter being broken down, just by continuing to express. But, that's not to say there will be periods where all that buildup comes back. But I found it builds up faster the less that you're allowing yourself to just express authentically, the more that you're hesitating. Hesitation really doesn't, I can't really think of an example where it's benefited me. Usually it's just, it gets in my way, and thinking about things gets in the way of just the other form of intelligence that we were kind of talking about, honestly, before we went live, where it's there and you don't have to think about it. Like the same intelligence, but that digests your food, the same intelligence that keeps your heart beating, keeps you breathing, that like grows the trees and shit. Like there is this other thing working in the background, but we seem to think that our mental intelligence is primary. And in fact, it really does get in our way. And you see that in conversation. Another example is like in sports. The more I was thinking about myself, when I used to play soccer, the more I would fumble the ball, or when I was playing the piano and I had a recital and I was thinking, oh my God, what's the next part of the piece? I would just blank. I would forget. And so it does take a level of just having the courage to let go and give in to whatever happens to just surpass that. But it's very tempting to hold on.
Oh yeah. Well, and it really helps. So one thing I used to say with people who were suffering from anxiety, coaching clients and whatnot, was, well, what if all that did happen? They're like, oh my God, I'm so worried that, my friend's not going to want to talk to me. I'm worried my wife's going to leave me. I'm worried I'm going to lose my job, lose my house. What if you do? I mean, what if that happens? Are you just going to curl up and die? Is at the end? It's the end of existence. No more adaptation. It's happened. You're fucked, right? Or are you going to roll with it and learn? Maybe start over again. Maybe have to build from scratch. Are you going to continue? Are you going to continue? And that's really the only question, because we hesitate. We think about it because we want a certain end result, because we assume that that's the right end result. That's the one that's going to lead us to happiness. And we try to avoid other end results, which we assume are terrible and not going to do any good for our life whatsoever. It would mean a lot about us in terms of being less valuable and so on and so forth. And that's kind of the whole point, right? Is to just go, well, I don't know. Just continue forward. To let that go. To just jump in and recognize that even if things go badly, you're going to keep going. You're going to keep going. And so that's the important part about jumping in, is accepting that you might stumble, but you'll get back up, because that's the only way you've ever learned anything. Like, you might go, right, I'm going to stop thinking about this. I'm just going to say something. And then all of a sudden somebody's like, what the fuck, man? And you're just like, all right, well, that's how that lands. But almost immediately we're like, you see, that's why I need to think about it. It's like, no, you just learned a lesson. You just expressed yourself and experienced a ripple, and your intelligence was informed by it. You don't have to go, I said the wrong thing, to realize that you said something that had a consequence, said something that maybe, didn't mix well with the person that you were talking to or the situation that you were in, like telling a knock joke at a funeral. Perhaps that's not the way to go, especially if you're using the casket, right? But you don't have to beat yourself up in order to learn that lesson. You're going to learn it by virtue of the experience that follows, right? And we forget that. We think that we actually have to have this narrated list of the lessons that Ray has learned today, and I don't even know most of the lessons I'm learning, admittedly, because as you said, that intelligence is beating my heart. It's breathing my lungs. It's keeping my body going. Who knows what else it's fucking doing? Who knows what else I'm learning? That's not some concept I can easily write down.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, that's helpful to remember. Like, you don't actually know how you're doing, at what point in your journey you are. There's no way to know. And so all you're really left with is here in this moment and the opportunities that are directly in front of you. But going back to that feeling of like trying to control our growth, yeah, that is a bitch. We just want our growth to be smooth, and like, we don't want to have to make mistakes and stumble and fall, because as long as we're doing something for an end result, for the idea of ourselves, like, that idea is constantly being threatened by any of those mistakes that we make. And we'll stumble and then be like, see, like, this is proof that I'm a piece of shit. I'm not capable of this. And then we just go back to repeating the same things that have worked for us in the past. But then over time, as you do that, it doesn't hit the same, right? And you are left feeling unsatisfied and still feeling like a victim, and still looking for, a silver bullet for somebody to tell you how you can feel better. And we don't want to admit to ourselves that the only way to get over those things is just go through them. and facing that shit. And yeah, it's uncomfortable, but whoever said it wouldn't be, right? Everything that we've ever had to learn, the process of walking even was really fucking uncomfortable. And yet we learned how to do it. Not everything that we've ever had to learn has been, a struggle. And it's funny how quickly we can forget that. And we can't admit to ourselves that it will be a struggle because then it's more intimidating, or I don't know, it threatens this ego that we are clinging on to make ourselves feel like we have some semblance of value or certainty.
If
It
it's a
really is a
struggle,
bitch.
obviously, I'm not doing very well if it's a struggle.
Mhm.
But that's it. And that's often exactly the challenge. Like, you dare to put yourself out there, it doesn't go according to your ideal. And so you just don't bother to do it again. Not realizing the daring to put yourself out there, regardless of how it went, was a step in the direction. Like, you actually did learn. It just didn't happen the way you wanted it to in your head. You're like, yeah, I've memorized some pickup lines. I'm going to go up to that girl. I'm going to use one of those pickup lines. You go over, it doesn't work. You're like, fuck. See, this is why I knew women wouldn't like me. I knew this would never work. And you walk away all frustrated, not realizing that while you may not have learned to, quote unquote, use a pickup line, you at least learned how to walk over to someone. You have learned something. You have picked up something. Now, if you could just let go of the pickup line part and just go with the walking over, something else might happen, right? But that's how you learn. You learn, you go over, you overextend yourself, or you hesitate. There's a consequence. You learn from the next time, maybe not to do that, or to do it a little less, or to err in the opposite direction entirely. Last time you hesitated, this time you charged forward too quickly, and that's very much it. And it's always based on need and fear, right? But that's what changes our ability to learn from all of these things, and that in fact is what we're learning at the foundation of it all. Why am I rushing? Where am I trying to get? And that's the point. When you really take that in, you start taking in more of what you're going through right now, right? As opposed to always going like, where's going to satisfy this feeling that I'm not enjoying my life? It's like, you're not enjoying your life because you're trying to get somewhere.
That's very true. Like, we cling on to these ideas about what the ideal situation would be, right? And that is the reason why we judge whatever happens, and we then come up with an idea that we're a fuck up or like we're not capable. But if you go into a situation without having any expectation of how it's going to go, because you're already okay with how you are right now, and what your life looks like, the person that you are, then any outcome you can sort of see the value in. It's like, well, yeah, rather than being like, oh, I didn't get that girl's number, it's like, okay, wow, well, I learned that I shouldn't talk to them this way. Right? Or, you know, some things worked, some things didn't. And that's
Yeah.
really the best that you can do. And no matter what the outcome is, you walk away with something. You walk away with more context that then informs every decision you make going forward. And it doesn't have to be like you said before, a concrete lesson that you can apply to every situation, but it's just like trusting that knowledge, that intelligence is growing, underneath in a way that you don't need to understand. And yet it's still there. And we can have faith, in that intelligence in the same way we have faith in it to keep us breathing and alive. And we don't have to constantly be worrying about whether we're going to keep breathing.
Just have to keep moving forward and pay
Mhm.
attention. And that's it. The rest takes care of itself. And to me, as above, so below. As much as that's true individually, it's true collectively. That's why I'm excited about Dualistic Unity. I don't know where it's going. I just know it's moving forward. And there's a lot of potential in that. So I'm excited to see where it goes. That said, though, and on that note, we are going to wrap up this episode a little bit earlier than we normally would, and it's because of one of those exciting things that's happening with DU. We actually have a meeting with one of the local business owners in about an hour and 15 minutes, and so I got to go walk up. I'm going to meet with Amanda and Andrew on the way. I know they're in the comment section right now. You guys better make your way towards my place. And we're going to go and have that meeting. And then we're going to be back this afternoon for an episode of Social, followed by a fucking roundtable, which is really exciting. But there's just so much happening. And again, like, I don't need to know where it's going. I know it's me going there. I know it's us going there. I have faith in that. I don't need to feel certain. That's why I'm so excited about this. It's going to turn into something.
I'm just excited to find out. But yeah, thanks everyone for tuning in. And for those of you listening, once this is an episode, shout out to you as well. Yeah, we'll see where the fuck this goes. And I'm just excited to keep jumping in.
Fuck yeah. And admittedly, I'm really digging this new series, DU Rambles. This has been a lot of fun. We're definitely going to try and do these a little bit more consistently because I know there was a Tuesday that we missed. Bunch of shit happening. I was in Denver and whatnot, but I love these episodes. This has been a lot of fun. Thank you, everyone, for joining us, participating in the comment section. If you haven't yet, if you're listening to this after the fact, do join us 1 p.m. Eastern time on Tuesdays. You can catch us on YouTube Live or Twitch, LinkedIn. We're also on the X, Twitter, and a bunch of other channels. So you can find us there. And if you haven't followed Jackie yet on TikTok or Instagram, follow Jackie on TikTok because we're trying to get her over 10,000 followers so that way she can live stream with us.
Yep, that ad is at Jack Eternity. That's and awesome. It shares an E. Anyway. All right.